All right, I need to start plugging this hard. The next live recording of the podcast will be Saturday, April 18th at 1 p.m. Gratitude Brewing in Eugene, Oregon, of course, with the mighty Lydia Yuknovich. We do this in partnership with the Northwest Review, you heard. It should be a rockin' event, and if you're in Eugene or the surrounding areas, find the RSVP link in the show notes or on my various social platforms to reserve yourself a free ticket. We want to give gratitude a head count because this is going to be huge. ACNF this podcast shares a promotional sponsorship with the 2026 Power of Narrative Conference taking place March 27th and 28th in lovely Boston, Massachusetts. This year's keynote speakers include Ken Burns, Patrick Radden Keefe, Angela Patton and Natalie Ray, Sarah Stillman, and Asma Khalid. There's a handful of CNF Pod alums on the total roster, so you're going to really want to take advantage. If you use the promo code NARRATIVE20 at checkout, you get 20% off your fee. That's some serious cheddar. Visit calmbeyond.bu.edu to register. Repairing, restoring, reconnecting through true storytelling. And no, I don't get commissions or kickbacks, so I'm not doing this for the money, man. Oh, and one last podcast sponsorship. This show is sponsored by the word bitterness. Nice to see them come back. A feeling of antagonism, hostility, or resentfulness. Being a writer of terrible insecurity and pettiness leads to feelings of bitterness. Bitterness. Because you'll never grow up.
Tonight, Frank Sinatra Jr. And I was like 5 years old, and I'd be like, poor bastard. You know?
Oh, hey, CNF, this is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast. It's Friday the 13th. Ooh. 1 week shy of the podcast's 13th birthday. That's wild. This is the show where I talk to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell. The art and craft of telling true stories. I'm Brendan O'Mara, with apologies. And wow, look who visited the digital CNF Pod HQ. It's Tom Junod. Listen, I don't have all day to sing the praises and list the back of the baseball card details of Tom's illustrious career writing for GQ, Esquire, and ESPN. He's a two-time winner of the National Magazine Award. His piece in Esquire titled The Falling Man is a reread for many of us around 9/11, and it takes a meditative and reportorial look at the man who had not chosen his fate but appeared to embrace it as he fell from the sky. Tom wrote the iconic profile of Fred Rodgers that was later turned into a movie starring Tom Hanks. In many ways, so much of Tom's work is writing about father figures, which of course brings us to the ultimate. In the days of my youth, I was told what it means to be a man, a memoir about his father. It's published by Doubleday. I saw a post on Instagram from Wright Thompson, or it might have been a comment, doesn't matter, who said Tom is the Michael Jordan of magazine writing, and the only time Wright was nervous to talk to someone, it was talking to Tom. And Wright is someone who has profiled Michael Jordan. That should tell you everything you need to know about Tom. Show notes to this episode and more can be found at BrendanO'Mara.com. Hey, you may also elect to subscribe to the wildly popular Substack. I don't know why I laugh. The wildly popular Substack Pitch Club, where I invite primarily writers to share a winning pitch or query, the colder the better, and have them audio annotate their reasoning throughout so you can read a little and listen a little and learn a lot. With issue 10, with Pete Croatto, I started putting the transcripts of each audio clip in its own footnote, so if you can't listen for whatever reason, and there are reasons, you can still read the insight and not miss a thing. I aim to serve, even if it kills me. Tom can be found on Instagram at Tom_Junod, and don't forget the D. It's a silent D at the end of Junod. And on the Facebooks and stuff, he's all over there. He's got a lot of people, a lot of friends. Google his work to read wildly ambitious stories from that particularly crazy era that was pre-internet magazine culture. The dude had a watch ad. In this episode, we talk about that watch ad, the mountain of writing a book, the difference between writing a magazine story versus a book, the no nut graph philosophy, saying yes whenever you can, telling his life story from the work he does about other lives, the one arrow in his quiver. I think he's got more, but he says he's got one. I think he has more. how there should be principles in journalism but no rules, writing beginnings that hint at an ending, writing before referring to notes, and combining love and truth-telling in his amazing memoir. Really amazing conversation. I hope you'll stick around for the parting shot. It's like the after-dinner chocolate. It's like the after party, but everyone is tired and kind of cranky. Here's Tom, and here's my latest CNF Pod intro riff, number 26. Yeah, I've made 26 of these things. Huh.
There's this long pause, and he goes, I just hear this, oh, fuck.
But you're a writer, and you're supposed to be writing.
Sitting down and putting in the hours is where it's at.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
Yeah, I've been at it for so long, and there were definitely times when I thought I was going to be one of those guys that had wrote a bunch of good magazine stories and then was never quite able to come out with a book. I'd been signed with Penguin Random House in one form or another since like the late 90s.
Yeah.
And I had not delivered a book. So this was there's a lot of pride. There's a lot of relief built in, and as we all know, relief is an underrated emotion. So
well, it's funny you bring that up, because when I talked to Nick Baumgarten last year at some point, and he's someone who's written a lot of just amazing profiles for the New Yorker.
Right.
He hasn't written a book either, and he's working on a memoir about like beer league hockey and everything, but he's just like, I'm just a fake writer, like I haven't written a book. And he hears like Nick Baumgarten, he's like thinking he's a fake writer and all this stuff. And I imagine you can maybe relate to that tension of having written so many great magazine things, but not having delivered the book.
I can definitely relate to it. I mean, I never thought of myself as a fake writer. I just thought of myself as maybe the guy who couldn't climb that particular mountain, which is the mountain. And it's also really, really interesting is that you don't really understand the difference between a magazine and a book until you write one. And the thing that is, to me, the most different about it, I mean, obviously there's these questions of permanence and scope and all of these things, but a book is not a long magazine article. And it took me a long time to understand that and to even understand what it means. It sounds like, it's something that you can say, but you almost like have to live it to understand it. But the really cool thing about it so far is that there's just like everybody responds to magazine stories sort of in the way that it's intended. They either like them or they don't like them. And if they like them, they sort of, you even have like generally in a magazine story, you have a nut graph that's in there that basically tells you how to read it and why you're doing it. I grew up as a writer writing nut graphs. That was always like, you write your lead, you write your nut graph, and you say, this is a story about, and you go on. And when I was writing the book, my editor, Bill Thomas at Doubleday, was just really insistent on the no nut graph, philosophy. And I didn't understand why for a long time. But now that the book is coming out, I do, because people just find their own thing in it. So many people have different reactions to books, whereas people, I think there's like a kind of a uni reaction to magazine stories. And they just find different things in it. I've been just surprised, like people saying, oh, if I was going to do a movie from your book, I would start here. And everybody has a different place.
Yeah. Well, and with the magazine stuff too, there's an immediacy to it. Maybe people are reading it over the course of an hour or 2 hours, and then and then you kind of move on from it. But to your point of the permanence and scope of a book, it's there. Like that. That's it.
Absolutely.
And winding the clock back a little bit, my God, that's going to be a pun in a moment. I was talking to Jonah Ogles, who kind of co-edits the Atavist magazine with Sayward Darby, and he's someone who kind of like me, same age, kind of grew up and came up really admiring the magazine work of you in that era in particular.
Right.
And he was just like, he's like, was Junod, was it true that he was in a watch ad? And I'm like, I don't know, but it sounds like it's possible. Were you in an actual watch ad?
I was in a Bill Blass watch ad. It was shot in Central Park, and it was a photo of me sitting there and like looking brooding. I was definitely caught publicly brooding in the photograph, and there were all sorts of crumpled up pieces of paper around me to sort of signify the travails of being a writer. There was I forget what the copy line was. It was about obsession, though. I remember it was about obsession. Yeah. What obsession had to do with Bill Blass watches, I don't know. But, I think Bill Blass watches sort of went out of business not long afterwards, but I definitely had a watch ad.
That's incredible. I mean, what does that even say about that era of magazine journalism, that like a star writer like yourself, like it would be the subject of an ad?
Right. It was really funny. It was just one of those things. And it was also a signifier of a different time a-coming. I did the ad just to sort of act on my philosophy of life, which is, try to say yes when you can, Yeah. So I was like, watch ad, okay, so maybe this is not the most, journalistically strict thing to do, but it's an ad. So I'm gonna sit there and publicly brood for a while, and they're gonna take my picture of me doing it. I got slammed by something that was just coming and starting then, which was the blog, which was the predecessor of today's, plague of social media. And so I got slammed in, a couple of places. I think there was a blog at the time called the AWL. They hit me pretty hard. But it was just something to do. Now I would like to say that it signifies a different time, but I have to add here, I think that it was last year, 2 years ago maybe, that Patrick Radden-Keefe was in an ad, and he was caught publicly brooding too, and he was not only publicly brooding, he was publicly brooding in like a trench coat. So people do what they can and do what they will.
Yeah. Well, and also talking with Jonah too, something that he long admired about your work is a certain sense of vulnerability that you've shown on the page, but also that you're able to tease out from your subjects. And he just wanted to get a sense, and by extension me, just how do you report out that vulnerability so we're feeling, that degree of emotive pulse on the page?
I've always basically tried to work so that you could tell my life story from the work I do about other lives, And I'm not talking about first-person pieces. I'm talking about third-person pieces, or sometimes second-person pieces, or whatever. But if you take a look at, the stories that I write, you can kind of see where I've been and where I'm going, or where I'm afraid to go in those pieces. And I mean, I think some of that is just my tendency to write about things that unsettle me. Like, in the beginning of my magazine career, I was definitely, my wife and I were going through some infertility issues and things like that. And, I wrote about that through other people. And when 9/11 came around, I mean, I, like everybody else, realized the world had changed in a really fundamental way. And how was I going to measure that? How was I going to mark that? And, I marked it by looking at a picture that I had the tendency, and so many others had the tendency, to turn away from, which was Richard Drew's photograph of what became, known as the falling man. I looked at that photograph, and I mean, within seconds, I knew that that's what I was going to write about one day. It just was a matter of trying to set it up. So I just have that instinct. And I don't want to sound pretentious saying that, but I do. It's just been what I've been writing about. I've been writing out of myself into others for a long time.
Yeah, and being able to look at the uncomfortable and kind of in bed with that instead of looking
Yeah.
away, I suspect is part of the draw as well.
It is definitely the draw, and it's an advantage as a writer because when you commit yourself at that level, when you feel uncomfortable, I mean, you never know what you're going to write,
Mm.
which is a really cool thing. I have to say that, I mean, I have reasons for approaching people, but it's, a lot of the times those things are abandoned once you get on the page because you have an experience with that person or that thing that surprises you and in its way either comforts you or unsettles you, and then you write about that. Fred Rodgers was somebody who surprised me by comforting me. Other stories, they surprised me by keeping me unsettled.
Mm. Yeah, and you've already alluded to it, and it's a question I like asking of people who have been doing a lot of profile writing for years or feature writing. Is that like what are the subjects that you're drawn to say about you in particular?
Well, I mean, to bring it around to where we are now, they definitely say that I'm a guy with daddy issues. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the first, when my big break as a magazine writer was the day that David Granger called me up when I was sort of at the end of like a brief run that I had with Sports Illustrated. And that was not, a lucky one for me. I had trouble getting a lot of my pieces past the editor-in-chief there named Mark Mulvoy. He just didn't like it. Basically, he just didn't like what I was doing. And I had trouble with that, and I was really kind of wondering what was gonna happen next. And David Granger called me, he had just gotten the job at GQ, and he pulled something off the kill pile. I had written a piece for a guy named Elliot Kaplan who had left GQ to go to Philly Mag, and he had bought a piece and killed a piece, and it was about oysters, and David read it and liked it, and I was kind of immediately signed up to his thing. And then David gave me the greatest gift a writer can have, which is a really long leash.
Mm.
And so right away I just started writing stuff that meant a lot to me, and a lot of them happened to be stories about fathers, sons, and so on. The first story, I mean, not the first story I wrote for David, but the second story, the story that I really he was like, you can write about anything you want to. What do you want to write about? And I was like, Frank Sinatra Jr. And he was like, why do you want to write about Frank Sinatra Jr.? And I said, because when I was a kid, there was a restaurant right near where I grew up in Long Island called the Sunrise Village. And it used to have, every once in a while, there'd be a big sign out in front saying like, tonight, Frank Sinatra Jr. And I was like 5 years old, and I'd be like, poor bastard. So I mean, that was one of the first things I wrote. And then I went and wrote a story on Tony Curtis, because he was not my dad, but he was a person very much like my dad, and out of that era of, fathers who took it as part of their parental dossier, complete license.
Mm-hmm.
So he was that guy. And then I wound up writing my father's fashion tips for David and GQ, which was really the first time I confronted, my dad squarely, but kept his secrets there. I mean, my father, when I met my father for my father's fashion tips, he wound up telling me a lot of his secrets. And I didn't share them on the page. I shared his secrets about like turtlenecks and white shirts and cuffs and cleaning your navel and all those kinds of things. But I did not go on and talk about his secrets until now.
Yeah. That moment of being at SI and a bit of a watershed moment for you there, not getting pieces, published,
Yeah,
just your taste not aligning up with the taste of the
right,
ultimate, the ultimate.
right. Yeah, Mark Mulvoy, thought I was a Gary Smith knockoff.
Hmm.
He was like, "We have one Gary Smith. We don't need another."
Yeah. What does that do for you in your headspace and your confidence at the time?
I have one sort of arrow in my quiver that works for me, and that I just don't give up. I just don't. And I write about that in the book. I'm just a determined person, and when somebody says no, I am very, very, very much more interested in proving that I can do it. It's a character trait that could be considered a flaw on some occasions, I think, and probably most. But at the same time, as a magazine writer, or as a writer, it's been extremely helpful to me.
Yeah. And a conversation you had with Pamela Koloff, a bunch of years ago at this point. God, I think it was 2013.
Yeah.
I found just some some pieces from that transcript on Neiman, and he said this is particularly insightful and something that really resonated with me. It's like the great vice of journalism in the age of social media is not its recklessness, but rather its headlong rush for respectability, its self-conscious
Yeah.
desire to please an audience of peers rather than an audience of readers. And I think that
I
that
said,
really,
I said that.
yeah,
Cool.
yeah, and that
Wow.
really strikes me too as
Yeah.
someone who's like always desperately wanted to kind of be on the in crowd in one way or another.
Sure.
I think sometimes maybe our motivations are a little skewed. Like, yeah, we want to impress our peers, but like we're forgetting we're ultimately in service of readers. And I just really love that insight you shared.
Well, I think that it just gets at the great paradox of social media and our time. Social media was and mm, was intended to be, the greatest experiment in free speech of all time, but it's turned out to be a weapon of censorship, and both censorship by crowd, by mob, and censorship by the individual. People have become, I believe, more censorious of themselves in the age of social media. You don't really find, journalistic experimentation anymore. You just don't.
Yeah.
And I think that my understanding is that Elizabeth Brunig at the Atlantic, she wrote a second person piece about, dying of measles. This is how you die of measles, I believe is the piece. And my understanding is that she's been attacked for that. What? That is crazy. What is going on? I mean, the great thing about journalism is that I would say that there are principles, but there shouldn't be rules. And
Yeah.
try to be you try to be fair, and of course you have to be factual. But beyond that, the great thing about journalism, at least the great thing about journalism in the heyday of magazine journal, is that you could kind of try anything. And you didn't have to answer to anybody but readers or your editor. Now you have to answer to this seething invisible mob.
Right. Yeah. And a seething invisible mob who lacks the courage to go out on the edge and to experiment and to push those boundaries
Right,
and even
right.
swing back to the norm if it doesn't work, but at least you're doing
Yeah,
something.
there's a zillion different ways to write a magazine story, and I think I've done like every single one of them, if I'm not mistaken, for good and for ill. I think that I've written a lot of, really, really good stories, but I've definitely done some things that haven't worked, and you take your beating and you go on. But the idea that you've like messed with the journalism gods by writing a story in second person is insane.
Yeah. And in that same conversation with Pamela, yeah, you guys were talking about structure, I think, and John McPhee at the New Yorker, and you said his argument for outlining was one of the most definitive arguments against outlining I've ever read.
I said that.
Yeah.
Uh, Well, so I have the once again, it's a weakness that I have just by sheer refusal to say no, have turned into a little bit of a strength, and that I am intensely unorganized. I am intensely unorganized, and
Yeah.
so when I am forced into the stance of organization, say when being asked to like promote a book, which I've never done before, but you have to be more organized than I usually am in order to do this. It's hard for me. I am definitely a person who figures out stories, not even on the fly, but at 5:30 in the morning when I wake up and I'm not able to go back to sleep and I start obsessing. And then a lot of times, structures just reveal themselves to me at that time. I don't know why that is. It's just the way my brain is wired.
Yeah.
But the idea of having everything sort of laid out in front of you where you're just sort of executing a plan, I personally can't do it.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are some people who are meant to do it. John McPhee clearly was meant to do it. I mean, I've read his story, Travels in Georgia, 50 times. I mean, I love that story. I love the structure of it, but I couldn't do that.
Yeah. And this kind of gets to interviewing, but it's actually a little passage from your book about saying I grow nervous before every call. Same.
Yeah.
Wondering what right I have to make it. Sometimes I overcome my trepidation by telling myself that I'm providing the people on the other end of the line a chance to tell their stories. And you go on a little bit, but it's but this idea of interviewing is at the crux of what we do.
Sure.
And just what's your typical approach to interviewing people so you get the best out of them?
Well, number one, so the book hardly has anything about my career in it. There's very, very little in there about my work as a journalist, and it's designed as such. But so I was nervous, particularly nervous in that situation for that call, because I was calling a woman that I believed was my cousin.
Mm-hmm.
I discover in this book, I discover long lost family members. I found 3 first cousins in the course of writing this book, which and their existence and their proximity to me in the family tree changed my definition of family. So I had a good reason to be nervous when I was doing that. But when I did get in touch with my cousin Vicky and my cousin Steve and my cousin Ralph, I mean, I try to do the interviews the same way. I try to be true to what put me on the phone in the first place. I don't go in with a list of questions. I go in with a feeling of what I was curious about. Like, I'm on the phone for a reason. What is the reason I'm on the phone? Well, it's because I'm curious about this, and so I just try to have a conversation with people about what I'm curious about or what I'm interested in, and that really works for me.
Yeah. And you said you're disorganized by nature. Same.
Yeah.
But how
I'm talking to you while I'm in the car. That just gives you a total understanding of how disorganized I
I
am.
love it. And how do you wrangle your research and transcripts and all that stuff when you do sit down to write and the conditions under which you're composing?
Well, I mean, I am definitely of the feeling that I sit there and I do it, and I write a first sentence, and there's a certain kind of thing that I'm looking for. I like it. I like a sentence that sort of it's not about the ending, but has like a presentiment of the ending in it that is sort of neutral and that is sort of a provocation at the same time. Neutral, a neutrally provocative sentence, I think, is really what I'm looking for. And I organize stuff sentence by sentence, and I write before I refer to notes. And I don't mean that I write the piece and then I refer to the notes, but as I write, it becomes clear to me that, oh, I need to hear from a person here. I don't want people to get, I don't want to squash people's voices, because people's voices are really, really interesting. There was a time, especially when I was, I think at GQ, I used to go and sort of try to write stories without quotes, sort of you have this, the quotes be sort of part of the telling, sort of absorbed into the telling.
Mm-hmm.
But I sort of don't really do that as much anymore, because generally the quotes are they bring life to the story in a way, and I think that they're ultimately more fair than me sort of speaking for somebody. So I have I keep on writing until I need a quote, and then I go find it. And once again, it's a really poorly organized way of doing it, but it's how I do it.
Yeah. And a moment ago too, you said how much you appreciated Granger giving you the long leash.
Granger's long leash was definitely not when it came to like getting to work, because
Mhm.
there the leash was a daily 8 o'clock in the morning call. Like,
Okay.
what do you got? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you writing? What are you doing? Why haven't you done anything? So I mean, it was a pretty short leash on that level.
Yeah.
The long leash was that David expected me to try to write, outside the rules of accepted magazine journalism. That was our deal.
Yeah.
I was going to try to be provocative. I was going to try to do things, differently. I wrote a story for David on a profile of Michael Stipe that was half fiction, and he did not know that was coming. And so when I read it, I sent it. I wrote it, and I sent it to him, and I got this call back, and he was all excited. He was like, "What? This is amazing!" He was like, "You told me you didn't get anything from this guy." And I said, "What would you do if I told you I made half of it up?" And there was this long pause, and he goes, I just hear this, "Oh, fuck." So, but that was the relationship that David and I had. Who would have printed that? Nobody else but David. So
Oh my God. That is hilarious. Yeah, I can just picture like like something of the color draining out of his face in that moment.
yeah.
So with the memoir, it's a book that you've kind of like essentially said been writing all your life, but you spent the better part of 10 years really cracking, getting a wiggle on with it, so to speak. What I know you've written upwards of 230,000 words
Yeah,
of this
I
and
had
scrapped it. Yeah.
I had an abandoned massive. I wouldn't call it a draft, but it was an abandoned mess of pages
Mm-hmm.
that had I'm sure that there were good parts in there, and I'm sure that it set me up for what the book eventually was able to do. But it had a real fundamental problem in that, like, it was 230,000 words, and there were many of the main characters of the book who hadn't even been introduced yet.
Yeah.
So it was just writing.
Yeah.
You've been there, I've been there. There's times when you're writing because you're desperate and you can't stop, and you know that you have to keep on going, but you're not at it, you're not in it, and you know it. And that's what I felt like. And when I finally looked around and looked at what I was doing and realized that there was like characters who were essential to the story, who had not even been mentioned yet. And I realized then that I was heading for an a million word draft. There was just no question about that.
Yeah.
And of course, a million word draft is it sounds impressive. It's really not. It's a failure, right? So that's why I abandoned that. And the thing that really enabled me to start over again. And at that point, I did not know whether I was going to be able to finish this book or not. I had just completed a leave, and the leave was, intended to finish the book. And instead I abandoned the book at the end of the leave. And so that's a pretty bad, position to be in. It's pretty scary.
Yeah.
And the thing that saved the book is that it was the summer of 2020, and I got sick. And to this day, I don't know exactly what I have. It was identified as Lyme disease, but I was so sick that I couldn't even, for the first time in, I don't know, years, I couldn't even think of writing. I write. I'm a pretty much a daily writer. I keep a journal and et cetera, and I couldn't write. And so what I did was take a look at very old journals and start reading through them. And I read the sections about me and my dad, and I understood that I had been in a contest with this overwhelming man since I was a child. And I'm talking about 3 years old. I'm talking about a child. And that the book had to be true to that. It wasn't just a history of my dad. It wasn't just the story of my dad. It was the story of my dad and me and how I responded to him. And that's how the book was reborn as that.
When did the shape of it start to reveal itself to you, its true shape?
I can tell you right now, when I wrote the section that begins with me waking up in the morning or being awakened in the morning by the sound of my father's ankles. That's where it all happened. Because all of a sudden I was in there not as a writer, with decades of experience trying to write his first book. That was gone. That was gone with the 230,000 words. The thing that was there was a little kid trying to understand this man and trying to understand, why, to put it bluntly, why I was so frightened of him. That the sound of his ankles in the morning, which he would call an old war wound, which is true. Why that would wake me up as if an alarm had gone off, and that's what the book was, and remained for really until the very end.
Yeah, and the way you write about his speech, the ellipses that give a sense of the cadence of his speech, it never got old to me in the book. Like I loved it. I could hear the way he spoke, that slight pause before the emphatic final end to the clause.
Yeah.
Every time.
Exactly. I mean, it was, so I went and did, well, one of the things that I just did recently was do I narrated the audiobook, which was, new for me.
Yeah.
I'd never done anything like that, but I was determined to do it because I didn't think that anybody else, like, I don't care if they had gotten, Laurence Olivier to do it. He would not be able, no actor would be able to capture the sound of my father and the way that he spoke. And so I did it, and I do his voice the whole reading. And it just turned out to be a really, really powerful thing for me, a really emotional thing. I sort of experienced the book for the first time while doing the audiobook. It was intense. I mean, I read I don't know, a quarter of the book on the edge of tears, And then when I did a reading at KGB in downtown New York a few weeks ago, and I did my dad, and it was just wild because people just got it right away. It was just I felt like I was taking like a big risk, but the minute I did it, I was like, people were just, in the book. And that's what I really tried to get at. And what I think the book sort of succeeds in, it really puts you with my dad, and it doesn't offer you any avenue of escape. There's no analysis. There's no no, for me, pulling back on the, a discussion of toxic masculinity, which is, thank heaven, a term that never appears in the book, even though it's everywhere, of course, in the book.
Right.
It's everywhere and nowhere in the book.
Yeah.
But I really, worked hard at that, and I'm happy that my father's diction, which is, I think, one of the things that made me a writer, is in the book and is alive in the book.
Yeah. Well, early on too, you wrote, for when he is home, the house is divided. The very day is divided, like an occupied city in the war movies I watch on TV. And that's something that struck me in the house I grew up in. It's just like my dad had his little sanctuary in the basement. My mom was in the living room. My sister was in her room, and 10 years between us. And I would float between the three, typically staying with my mom. So in a lot of ways, I really resonated with young Tom in this book, right? It's just that sense of house division and no unity it really struck a chord with me for sure.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and, but the thing about my dad is that wherever my dad was his place, whether he was, in the basement, at the bar. He was not a workshop kind of guy.
Yeah.
But he, had a bar down in the basement. And if he was at the bar, or he was washing the car, or he was, wherever he was, he commanded that room to discomfort of all of us, I think. I think we totally respected his power.
Yeah.
We had no choice but to respect his power. But at the same time, I don't think it was I look back on it, I don't think it was easy for any of us in the house. It's hard being in the presence of something that's so much more powerful than you for the first 18 years of your life.
Oh yeah, and that sense of fear that can be imposed on the entire unit without any physical abuse, but there is a palpable sense of menace and malice when a certain patriarchal figure just enters the room. I experienced that myself too before my parents split up. It was just an essence, and you write about that particularly well too.
It was just an essence. To this day, when people say, "Well, why were you so afraid of your father?" I don't really have the answer. He used to get all upset about it, because he would sort of kind of tease me, at the dinner table when I wasn't eating my steak, and he would be sort of play acting. "Tommy, what's wrong with the steak?" And then I would begin, just shaking, and he would get all frustrated because he was like, "Look at this kid. Looks like he acts like I'm going to murder him." But I never even laid a hand on him, and he didn't until much. He hits me once, but it's much, much later.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I love how you write about your mother as well, and kind of the bond that you share of the shared fear of your father too. And I love that bond that you have, and she's such a wonderful presence in this book that ostensibly honors and kind of details your father's life and your love of him and revering of him. But your mom is very, very present in a welcome energy in this book.
Well, I definitely wrote the book to give my mom her fair shake. After I wrote my father's fashion tips for GQ, the only person, it was a really popular story, and the only person who didn't call me about it was my mom.
Yeah.
So, I knew, I knew that she didn't like it. I called her about a week after it came out. I said, "Mom, so did you read the story?" "Yeah, I read the story." I said, "Well, what'd you think?" And there was a long pause, and my mom goes, "Don't forget who raised you, kid." And that was it. That was the only thing she ever had to say about that story. And I definitely wrote this book in part to say I didn't forget who raised me, because she did. Because she did. There's just no question about that. I was alone with my dad. Traveled for God knows whatever reasons he traveled, and I was alone with my mom a lot. My brother and my sister, like yours, they're both 10 years older than I am. So when they went to college, I became an only child, and it was me and my mom, and it was me and my mom both terrified of my dad. This one, was one person in the house, and we weren't, really strong enough to protect each other, but we definitely, loved each other and protected the essence of each other. And there's there's some scenes in the book with my mom that they're the things that I wanted more than anything else when I set about writing the book and then rewriting the book.
Yeah. What did idolizing your father do to your mother?
I think it was a source of great pain to her. And I know it was a source of great pain to her because, there's a moment, it's in the book, but it's also in the heart right now, when my mom was 83 years old and was about the next day where she was going to undergo open heart surgery. She was scheduled for a triple or quadruple bypass. And at 83, that's almost like a 50-50 proposition.
Yeah.
So I went down to see her and to be with her for the operation. I went down to visit my parents' condo in Florida, and it was late at night, and I was sitting on the balcony, kind of taking in the Florida air. And my mother came out to the balcony, and the minute she opened and closed the door, I knew what she was out there for. I knew that she believed that she might die and wanted to give me some words to live by, say her piece. And so she sat next to me and she goes, "I know you idolize him." And I began right away, "No, Ma, I don't idolize him." She goes, and she raised her hand, not to hit me, but just stop me. She said, "No, I know. And it's all right. He's your father, but you need to know something." And what she said was, "He's a mean, nasty, little man and no one to idolize." So she actually couldn't have been more clear about how she felt about my idolization of my dad.
As a kid too, you start, your curiosity drives you to root around in your, your father's basement, and then you become privy to a certain measure of secrets. And a lot of this book too is about, you have this knowledge that using essentially to protect other people, but it's just like, so this book, there's a pulse of like the weight of those secrets that you're shouldering throughout, your entire adolescence into adulthood.
Yeah, I mean, I began, finding out my dad's secrets when I was really, really, really young.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad was, when I was 3 years old, my dad had an affair with one of my best friend's mothers, or my best friend's mother.
The night of the green dress.
Yeah, the woman in the green dress. I mean, and I was aware of it.
Yeah.
How do I know I was aware of it? Because many, many years later, when I did my father's fashion tips, I asked about her. I was like, because I knew something had gone on. It wasn't, and it was never talked about. It wasn't like my mom, told me about it. It wasn't like my brother told me about it or my sister. It was just there. It was just such a big thing that happened in my family. So I knew. And then, later on when I was in high school, I began actively investigating my dad and, doing things that were at once shameful to me and necessary to me, which in this case happened to do with like getting the combination of my father's briefcase and opening it. And then just being, at once, shocked by what was inside, and then in a weird way relieved by what was inside, because at least I wasn't crazy. At least I wasn't making this shit up. I knew it. I just knew it. And, it was a good training to be a journalist, but it was a really, really tough thing to carry around. And one of the things I've tried to make this book is an account, not just of the secrets in terms of like, these are the secrets my father had, but an account of what it was like and what it is like, because it's a very common experience to to go through life with the experience of secrets. Like, what's the experience? What does it feel like to know stuff that if you told it, your parents' marriage would be over, over. I mean, I had, by the time I was 16, all the information I needed to destroy my parents' marriage, and it's not a comfortable thing to have.
Yeah, it's a burden, but also a power in a way.
It was the only power I had.
Yeah,
That's why I did it.
yeah, and then as the book progresses, and you get to the in part 3, especially, is kind of what I call like this genealogical thriller, if you will. But there's a sense that you're coming in almost like a wrecking ball, and to start to answer, trying to tie together all these loose ends of the family tree.
Sure.
And how did you balance your desire of wanting to know and get answers with other people who might have been fine with those answers never having been put forth?
It was just a decision, I guess, that I made. I mean, it's a weird experience carrying around secrets that have obliterating power when it comes to the health and welfare of your family, the people that you love the most. It does a number on you. There's no question. And I had written about my dad a bunch of times and never really dealt with those secrets, even though I think every time I did, I came a little bit closer. I wrote my father's fashion tips for GQ. I wrote a story about my father's World War II experience called The Time of Their Lives for Esquire. And then I wrote a story about my father's gambling for ESPN, a story called The Family Vice. And all of those stories edged a little closer towards revelation. And in this case, it was just simply a matter of, I mean, it's literally now or never. If I don't tell this story now, I'll be silenced forever. And I just did not find a way to accept that condition. I had never really accepted it, I don't think. I don't think that there was the kid who found out the secrets, I don't think ever intended to be silent about the secrets, but secrets, have their own power. And so I started on the book, and I decided to just, it's time to tell the truth. And, I talked to people and I argued with people in my family. My brother-in-law told me something that he had not told anybody about my dad over many, many, many years. And he told it to me, and then he retreated from that, and he really didn't want me to put it in there. And, we battled over it. And finally, it just came to the point where I was like, this is your time to tell too. And he did. And I think it was a powerful moment for everybody, to the extent that when Ronnie, my brother-in-law, when he called me after reading the book, I mean, he called me in tears and said, thank you, thank you for reading it. I have to say that not everybody has had, that response, but I do feel that it was the thing that I chose to do and the thing that I had to do.
Yeah. With Liz, the Monahan family at large, and then Liz Ann also. Sure. Yeah, she was like, she says at one point, she's like, I'm just living a simple life and don't want to be a part of any book on the trauma, any lifelong old school issues. Right. That's just not my world. I'm sorry. And she eventually comes around to help you solve the puzzle. Yeah. But it must have been really touch and go for you. When do you push and when do you just give the space?
It was, because it's that whole, I mean, it's that whole question of, what gives me the right to wade into these, people's lives and demand truths of them. Yeah. There's a certain level of presumption there that is, it's overwhelming to myself, never mind them, So, yeah. I got lucky, and you know, and I think I got lucky because, you know, the book is the thing that I'm most proud of in the book is, you know, it's not a vindictive book. It's not a venomous book. I mean, I love everyone who walks through its pages, from my dad to my mom to my brother to my sister to Liz Ann. You know, I love these people, and my aunts are always in there, and these are people that, I mean, that was the great discovery of the second go round on the book. It was just like, you know, you love these people, show it, find a way to write about them truthfully, you know, and lovingly at the same time. And I think I was able to do that, and I think that was the great key of the book. I
Yeah.
mean, there's just no doubt that, you know, my father in some ways was an intensely destructive human being. You
Yeah.
know, but he at the same time, you know, he gave me, you know, so much, you know, and by the end of the book, I come right out and thank him. I believe the words are, for the opportunity of being your son. And I really felt that. I still feel that. There's so much. I don't think I'd be doing this right now without my dad. I mean, my mom was the person who gave me like unfailing support. You know, my mom was just not going to take, you know, a step back in her support of me, except when I wrote my father's fashion tips.
Yeah.
Then she took 2 steps back. She was not happy about that. But, you know, when I was a little kid, my poor, you know, brother and sister had to hear, you know, my mother say, "Tommy poops gold." And but, you know, that kind of love is to me, it's the essential part of the book. And I don't think I've ever been able to do that in anything I've written, to combine love and truth telling to the extent that this book enabled me to do it.
And your father, you know, he had, you know, a lot of extramarital affairs too. And when
You
you were writing
think?
about Fred Rodgers, you know,
It
you
was
were
great.
reckoning with that yourself, and you know,
Yeah.
you write about it in the book. And I imagine, just like, take us to, you know, just how hard that was to write, and how you felt you really needed to convey that experience in the pages. Otherwise, it wouldn't have come across as, you know, as honest.
Well, yeah. So yeah, we're you know, talking about, you know, what was the hardest, and you know, and remains the hardest, revelation in the book. And you know, it happened a long time ago, but at the same time, it was something that had, you know, really stayed with me forever. And when, you know, the Mr. Rogers movie came out, I felt it was time to, you know, to tell, my own secrets, you know, that I had spent a lifetime sort of writing about other people's secrets. And, you know, I had started a book that was about other people's secrets, and it was about time to tell them. And I decided, that I needed to in the book, because I held everybody, you know, kind of unflinchingly to the standard of sort of honesty. And I felt like I couldn't hold people to that standard without expecting it and employing it myself. I couldn't, like, so I went in there and, you know, asked Valerie Shockett, who was, you know, my friend's mom, and my father's girlfriend, lover, mistress, whatever you want to, however you want to term it. When I was 3 years old, I went and found her when she was in her early 80s, and essentially demanded that she tell me the truth, about her affair with my dad. I mean, how can I do that without, you know, talking about my own weaknesses and so on? And how can I, um, how can I write a book about the power that my father had over people unless I own up to the power that he had over me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and you said in that great Esquire profile that came out like a week or two ago, like I honestly don't think I could have written the book in good conscience and not talk about, my own experience. For me to not have spoken about it would have implied that I was unaffected by my dad's example, that power over you that you
And
said.
I was far from unaffected,
Yeah.
far from unaffected.
Yeah. What?
My in everything. I mean, my dad walks next to me all the time,
Yeah.
for good and for bad.
Right. Yeah, and it's so hard to and that's the incredible grayness of the human condition, that these people can hold the two things at the same time and be in such tension with each other.
Yeah, how can you love and fear and hate and feel an obligation towards one person all at once? It's really hard. And I think that, I think I'm able to do that. I mean, I think that the portrait of my dad in this thing is both true, and vivid.
Yeah.
My dad lives in those pages, and that's what I wanted more than anything else, because you couldn't his power over people, was just not an abstract thing. It just wasn't.
Yeah.
We talk about it, all the time. My father would, come back, from being out in the city in New York, and he would talk about like all the movie stars that he saw in, clubs in New York City. Like he would talk about Ava Gardner and Zsa Zsa Gabor and all these women, and say, couldn't keep her eyes off your father. And it sounds ridiculous. It sounds like he's a blowhard, but I've been there. I saw it. People couldn't keep their eyes off my father. It's who he was. And so, I mean, just to try to get that on the page was a challenge, and then eventually sort of a delight. It was, I can feel, when I read the book for the audiobook, I could feel the joy and the energy in the writing. It was pretty cool.
Oh, for sure. Well, and that's certainly conveyed, to some schmo like me on the other end reading it, and it's an incredible book, Tom, and it's and such a joy to get to talk to you about just writing in general and this amazing book you've written. As I bring these conversations out for a landing, I always just love asking the guests just for a recommendation of some kind for the listeners out there. It's just like anything you're finding cool and fun that you want to share with them. So that's I would just pose that to you, Tom.
Well, so I just recently read the 2 books by the Wolf brothers, Jeffrey and Tobias, about their dads.
Oh, yeah.
And so, Jeffrey wrote The Duke of Deception in 1979. And I think it was 1979, or maybe published in 1980. And Tobias wrote This Boy's Life in 84, maybe something like that. And so I had read This Boy's Life when it had come out, and of course I was completely, knocked on my can by it.
Yeah, everybody was.
Just the and I mean, just the unflinching testimony of that book, because it's not really about his father. Really, in this case, that book is mostly about his stepfather. But the first book in that series was Jeffrey Wolf's, his brother Jeffrey Wolf's book about the father. And I didn't read that for years because I was afraid to. I was definitely afraid to read that book. I finally did. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book. It's written with, a sophistication, and a power that you don't see too much these days. They're very different books. Tobias's books is much more plain spoken, and and Jeffrey's book is much more eloquent in the more traditional sense of eloquence. And both of them are so different, and yet they're all about one guy. And so they, they constitute a universe unto themselves. And it's a great universe to be in. And I don't think, you can, consider father-son memoirs without taking those into account.
Oh, fantastic. Well, such a joy to talk to you, Tom, and thank you so much for the work and the book and for carving out time to do this. This was awesome.
Well, I really enjoyed talking with you, Brendan. Really enjoyed it.
I mean, come on. Yes, awesome. Can you believe Tom Junod agreed to talk to this fucking piece of shit loser? It proves what a guy Tom is. Don't forget about the live recording of this program Saturday, April 18th at 1 p.m. at Gratitude Brewing in Eugene with Lydia Yuknevich. Thanks also to the Power of Narrative Conference for promotional support. Visit combeyond.bu.edu. Use that narrative20 checkout code. You'll get 20% off your enrollment. No, I don't get kickbacks or commissions. And if I was able to go this year, of which I can't for one reason or another, I'd be using this code, just like you, friend. I'm trying, man. I'm trying to run out of fucks to give. I think I did a parting shot about the race to run out of fucks to give, which usually happens around 50, give or take. Unless you're enlightened, then maybe you hit it at 40. If you hit it under 40, you're full of shit. Because of the promotion I do for this show on social media, of course, in the spirit largely of celebrating the guests who so graciously spend their time and insights with the show, you need to put that out there. I'd like to think that what I do is not self-indulgent, but who knows? I am the beholder, I guess. Yeah, I see a lot of writers who appear to have what I want, the classic highlight reel. I see a certain subset of writers hanging out together and I wish I was sitting at the bar with them, haranguing about these wild experiences of being able to, expense out a tank of gas, the big life. I remember feeling like I was outside looking in so much of the sports writing fraternity, of which primarily that's my backdrop. That's the main field I play on. Still am, honestly, but maybe in some small way I have one free drink ticket to the party and I don't want to waste it. I kind of wrote about this in the latest Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter, and that I played sports, and I was quite good, but I was playing not because I thought it was fun, because it wasn't. I grew to hate what I was good at, but because it made me kind of cool in the eyes of the people I was hoping to impress. It gave me some entree into a different subset of people that I wanted to impress, I guess. Did I say impress already? I did. In the same way of thinking, why do I want to write long features and write the kind of work that tends to be anthologized in years best sports writing? Is it because I love the work and desperately want to give voice to the voiceless and craft great stories that invite a greater sense of understanding and empathy? Or do I want to be seen at the cool kids table? Wouldn't it be cool to have that New Yorker cartoon avatar that really signifies they see you as part of the staff, even if you're just a freelancer? Do I do all of this to be seen as cool, to elevate my status, to be invited to speak at conferences or panels or some other bullshit? Those are cool and all, but if that's the reason, then you've got it all wrong, right? I'm strangely reckoning with a lot of these nasty, bitter feelings I thought I had purged a long time ago. And it's kind of like a what happens when you think the cancer's gone and it comes back? I don't want to say it's relapsing, right? Resurfaced? I don't know. Who's got a WebMD account? Anyway, they've really cropped back up in an unsettling way, and I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe it's because I've been in this post-book malaise for a while, and I'm waiting on what's happening with the next one, if there is a next one. I mean, my editor for the Frontrunner technically has the new proposal in 30 days or so to say no. I think he's had it for about 2 weeks, and I don't know if that is a 30-day rejection window starts when he receives the proposal or when he opens it. I don't know. I don't know when the clock starts. Maybe it's because I pitch some big authors to come on the podcast, sometimes months before their book comes out, to try to really get them before shit hits the fan. And then they tell me they're not doing the podcast rounds, and then I see them on the podcast rounds, and then that really pisses me off when that happens. If I were more mature and zen about all this, I'd be like, whoa, wait a sec, B.O. Look who you do get to talk to. Most recently, this episode, Tom Junod came on the show. Amazing. And gave the best of himself. That says something. Look at the people who actively pitched to be on the show with you. And yet, you still feel like some kid who didn't get a Valentine. You choose me? And there's a picture of a train? If you know, you know. I imagine certain comedians feel the same way, like, why didn't I get to be a judge on Nailed It? Thing is, we see so much of other people's accomplishments and our seeming lack of them. And we just see like dozens and dozens and dozens of people showing their highlight reel. And it might be like one highlight per person per month, but we're getting bombarded with dozens of people showing that highlight. So you're just getting just smacked in the face with this bullshit. All these accomplishments and your seeming lack of them. And it just makes us, primarily me, because I'm the shithead here, feel shitty. Like, you quickly forget about the opportunities and invitations that came your way because, you know, you're getting bombarded by hundreds of people's shit while you're waiting for the call. It comes down to, I guess, like scarcity mindsets and abundance mindsets, and a failure to account for one's own blessings and certainly limiting beliefs. A friend who knows what a piece of shit I am to myself, who knows me pretty well, forwarded me an email. And here's a little chunk of it from this newsletter she forwarded. A common parable in psychology goes like this. When an elephant is young, a chain is wrapped around its leg and staked into the ground. The elephant pulls, struggles, and eventually gives up, learning that escape is impossible. Years later, the elephant weighs several tons, yet the same small stake still holds it in place. One it could now rip out effortlessly, but it doesn't. Nothing is physically restraining the elephant anymore. What holds it in place is a conclusion it reached a long time ago. Many of the limits shaping our lives today were learned when our circumstances were very different and no longer apply, you fucking idiot. I added that last part. And very clearly, this is someone who really cares that I make the most of life, now that it's mostly halfway done, at least halfway done, if not more than halfway done. There's always the threat of getting hit by a Lane Apex garbage truck, driven by someone having a bad day, or, you know, I could just get the cancer or a stroke, you know, all that shit. I have no advice to give other than I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to be less insufferable, but I'm also trying to be somewhat vulnerable and transparent about how I'm feeling at a certain cross-section of time. On what day is it? On March 11th, 2026 is when I'm tracking this at 2:20 p.m. PST. It's just how I'm feeling at the moment. I understand I've been lucky, and the Brendan from 15 years ago would be pretty fucking tickled by what this Brendan has accomplished. Hashtag third person. But in the day-to-day grind of it all, it's easy to lose that perspective. The desperation is still there. It's just the desperation goalposts keep moving. Unless, you know, to bring this all back around, you've at long last run out of fucks to give. And my God, I can't wait for that day. So stay wild, CNFers. And if you can't do, interview. See ya.